Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 12 of the Bendy and Strong podcast. On this podcast, we talk about strength training with Ehlers-Danlos and joint hypermobility, all of the challenges involved in that, all of the amazing benefits that we can get from it. And today's discussion is going to be specifically around being flexible and adjustable with your training. This is one of the absolute must-have skills of training with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. It's one that sometimes we can get a little bit of pushback on from the fitness industry. The fitness industry might say, no, you need to be consistent, you need to do this other things. But with Ehlers-Danlos, we just have to make some adjustments. So hopefully today's discussion can give you some ideas on how to do that, but also, I guess, give you the permission to do that as well. And if you've got a coach who likes you to do things a set way, give you kind of the voice to say, actually, can we make some adjustments that work better for my body? So, disclaimer to start with, as usual, this is not medical advice. This is just the thoughts and ideas of me. My name is Annie. I'm an exercise scientist and strength coach with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. And I have been training for more than half my life. And I used to compete in powerlifting and bodybuilding. So I do have that competitive background as well. Now, as I said, the discussion today is going to be centered around making these adjustments. And it's this interesting thing because the fitness industry loves to give us this advice of, be consistent is one of the big ones. And be consistent meaning doing the same thing every week. So it is actually good advice for people who can do that kind of consistency of, don't just chop and change your program every single session. Once you get your program, stick to it for the allocated amount of time, maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is. And with that, don't be changing up too many things. If you understand scientific experiments, one of the key principles is that we want to control as many variables as we can. And that's kind of the approach that works a lot of the time with strength training. So, for example, if you're going into the gym and you're prescribed a back squat at a particular weight, don't go in and change it for a front squat or a machine squat. Or if you're doing a bench press, don't change your grip up every session. Be as consistent with your grip as you can. So that's part of the consistency thing. Then the other part of the consistency thing is people say, it's not about what you do in this session, it's about what you repeatedly do. So consistency is a huge part of training, and it's really been in the spotlight recently with on social media and things like that, people kind of pushing back against the quick fix approach, which is great. Like, I think the quick fix approach is rarely the answer. And consistency, yes, it is important, but something that nobody is talking about, because nobody's really talking about strength training with Ehlers-Danlos or other disabilities that are similar kinds of presentations, is the fact that we struggle to be consistent. We struggle to do the same thing each week. Sometimes it might be a decision of, do I do this thing that hurts me, or do I make a modification? If I make a modification, technically I'm going off program. What am I supposed to do here? And it's interesting because I think a lot of the discussions around programming and everything are really, they're geared towards very able-bodied people, and they don't factor in, I'm not sure why we're not ever factoring in hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos. I guess it's because it's just not really talked about. But also there's this idea that only healthy people exercise and disabled or sick people just don't exercise. And that must be why they're in this situation in the first place, because they're not exercising. But so many of us are actually doing it. We're trying to do it. And to be honest, a lot of us are doing really well with it. I was competing in powerlifting. I was one of the best powerlifters in Australia at one point. You can still do really cool things with this condition, but the only way to achieve that, in my experience, is by being adaptable and by being okay with adjusting things as you go. So in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about some of the common issues that people with Ehlers-Danlos have to deal with, and some adjustments that you can make. And wherever I can, I'll give my personal experiences, maybe a story or two here and there, just to give you an idea of what that actually looks like. Again, just reiterating that disclaimer that I gave before, this is not hard and fast medical advice. If you've got these things, you need to talk to your doctor, your physio. Make sure they're a good one. Talk to them and discuss this with them. I don't want you going out here and applying this and it wasn't the right thing for you. So this is just, it's hard for me to give advice for every single person, but this is just the best advice that I can give. And then you need to adjust that to your needs and working with your medical team to do that. So on this list of things that can affect our ability to exercise and specifically strength train, because that's really my focus. We've got POTS, we've got joint pain, we've got CCI, we've got intracranial hypertension, we've got fatigue, and then we've got just like a general flare-up. So let's get stuck into them. And wherever I can, I'll give a little bit of like medical or just an overview of what these things are. Some of them, they're not my expertise, but wherever I can, I'll just give a little bit of information on them. You might be someone who's hypermobile and you're listening to this and you're like, I don't have any of these things. And then you're like, oh, wait, I do have some of these things. So let's just go through them. So we'll go through POTS first. POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it's a form of dysautonomia. That dysautonomia is basically dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system. So with POTS, we can have issues with the heart rate suddenly climbing when we start doing exercise. It just goes out of control. And some of the POTS symptoms are made worse with standing up. So it's postural. P stands for postural. So standing up or being upright in general can be something that triggers the POTS symptoms or changes in posture as well. So POTS is something I'm not officially diagnosed with it. I suspect that I have it, but it's something that we need to make adjustments for. Sometimes it can be worse. Some days it's worse than others. Some people with POTS will struggle to do exercises standing up at all or even seated upright. They need to do everything lying down. Some people with POTS may struggle to press weights overhead, so like a shoulder press. That can be really challenging. And just in general, changes in posture or getting dizzy or lightheaded while exercising in general. So how can we adjust a program for POTS? This is, I think, if you've got POTS symptoms that are causing a lot of issues, it's probably something that will be a little bit more longer term rather than a short burst of this is an issue suddenly out of nowhere and then it's gone the next day. So this will be a case of you working with your coach or rehab specialist or whoever it is that you're working with your exercises to devise you some exercises that you can do seated or lying down. Now, the cool thing about strength training is we've got all these different machines and cables and everything that we can actually basically rearrange gravity with. So if you're just stuck with free weights, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Free weights are things like dumbbells and barbells. But with machines, we're actually using pulley systems to change the line that gravity is acting along. So we can do exercises lying down that we couldn't do, if we're doing them with free weights, we're limited by the direction that gravity is acting in. But with machines and cables and even bands as well, we can adjust them to do them lying down. So that is one of probably the best adjustments that you can make is you can work with your exercise scientist, strength coach, whoever you're working with, and tell them this is something that I struggle with. So if you're feeling really out of breath, if you've got POTS symptoms and your exercise sometimes makes it worse, choosing exercises where you're seated or even better lying down can be hugely beneficial. Now, the next one that I've got on the list is joint pains, specific joint pains. So as you're exercising, you might find that suddenly a joint pain happens. And this is something I've talked about before. People with Ehlers-Danlos, we have these fluctuations in muscle imbalances. First of all, we've got extreme muscle imbalances. Then secondly, we have fluctuations in them, which is just great. So these extreme muscle imbalances, we might have one muscle that's very, very weak and one muscle or very underactive and one that's very, very strong or overactive. Whenever we want to do a movement, our brain says to that overactive muscle, hey, you're the one who I want to do this. And the other muscles just aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's a very like summarized, generalized kind of way of describing it. Not very technical, but just to get an idea in your head what this looks like. So we've got these extreme muscle imbalances, and a lot of the time finding that muscle imbalance and strengthening it is just like a cure for the pain, for the issues, for the dysfunction, for the movement dysfunctions. What we find, though, is with Ehlers-Danlos, this will change over time. So you'll get really good. You'll build up a lot of strength in this particular corrective exercise. And then over time, it might actually cause a new imbalance. And the muscle that used to be weak is now the stronger muscle and the other surrounding muscles are now weaker, and it may even trigger the exact same pain that you're originally complaining about. So one of the best ways that we can work around joint pain is to firstly understand this idea that we have these muscle imbalances, that they're fluctuating. We need to constantly be on the lookout for what's weak and strengthening that. But we can simply make adjustments to the movements. So sometimes it's easy to understand. Sometimes it can be quite hard. If you don't have a really good rehab specialist, you might be on your own figuring this out. How am I supposed to keep training when I keep getting this joint pain? And I guess an example that I can give you is during my bodybuilding prep, I had to do a lot of leg training, had to get my legs really nice and big because I was competing in the wellness division, which is a very lower body dominant division. And one of the exercises I was doing with my coach was doing a hack squat. And hack squats, this particular machine, when I went down lower than a particular point, I always got knee pain or hip pain. So what we did, rather than just avoiding the machine altogether or avoiding squats altogether, we found the range of motion that I could do pain-free and just did that. So it was a case of when I was training with my coach, he actually would put his hand there on the machine to the point where, so when I was coming down, his hand would be there. I'd come down, I'd feel his hand on the machine. That indicated to me that that was the point that I needed to stop at. And then I would go back up. So this ended up being like a quarter depth or half depth hack squat, which a lot of people would poo-poo and say, oh no, that's bad training. That's not right. But for me, that was the best thing I could do. So one of the things that we can do when we get joint pain, or I would also put into the category of joint pain, clicking in the joint or clunking in the joint. So clicking is like that little flicky feeling. Clunking is something not like tearing, but something like something bigger moving that we can feel it. Some of you will know exactly what I talk about when I say clicking and clunking. So with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility, we want to avoid clicking and clunking as well. So if you're getting joint pain or clicking and clunking during an exercise, there are some other things that we can adapt as well. So I've mentioned the range of motion. Some of the other things that we can do is we can change the grip that we're using. So if it's for a lat pull down or a rowing exercise, we've got what we call underhand grip, which is palms up. We've got overhand grip, which is palms down. And then we've got a neutral grip, which is palms facing each other. So we can change up the grip. So we're using a different grip, and that might get rid of the clicking or the clunking or the pain in the joint. And if that's the case, then usually that's a pretty safe way for us to be doing that exercise, as long as it's not triggering pain or clicking or clunking. So we can change the grip that we're using. That applies to pressing exercises as well, bench press, dumbbell bench press, barbell bench press, machine bench press. All of these upper body exercises, we can change our hand position, and that might make a big difference. With the lower body exercises, we can change our foot position. If we're doing a squat and it doesn't feel nice when our feet are in close, we can try it out wide. And if that makes a difference, great. We've found the solution. If we're doing a leg press, we can change where our feet are positioned on that platform. And if that makes a difference, great. We can try using a different machine. So we can go, okay, free weight barbell squat hurt me. So I'm going to go over and do some machine squat, maybe a Smith machine squat or something like that. So we're still keeping the general movement pattern, but we're just changing it so that it's whatever one we can do, whatever version we can do pain-free. So these are some of the things that we can do with joint pain. For me, for a while, I could not do barbell squats, but a Smith machine squat felt great. And what I actually did was I used the Smith machine and I built my strength up on that Smith machine. And then over time, I was slowly able to integrate back in to doing barbell squats. So a lot of the time, doing a mimicking movement that we can do pain-free. If a particular exercise hurts us, changing that exercise just enough so that we can do it pain-free and working on that over time, a lot of the time that can actually allow us to build up the strength and stability and ability to then go and do the movement that we were originally getting hurt with and to be able to do it pain-free. Obviously, we're not going to go and do it if it's hurting us, but we only ever want to do pain-free movement. But that's a way that we can build up to doing it. So these are some of the things. We can add in an exercise band around the knees, for example. If you're getting low back pain during a hack squat or a machine squat or a squat in general, adding in an exercise band, a booty band around your knees, just to get those muscles around the hips engaged a little bit more, that might make all the difference. Now, one other thing that I'll suggest here with the joint pain, a lot of the time the joint pain is caused by these muscle imbalances. So something we can do is we can find the weak or underperforming muscle, and we can utilize this concept called post-activation potentiation. What on earth is that? Well, post-activation potentiation. So potentiation means that what we're doing now is basically going to amplify the effect of what we're about to do. That's what the word potentiation means just in general. So post-activation potentiation means after we activate the muscle, that muscle's then a little bit more ready to help in a movement. So if we do a glute exercise, we can feel that glute work a little bit more for the next thing that we're about to do, but also the brain is more likely to contract that muscle, or it's better able to contract that muscle for an amount of time afterwards. So what does this mean? This means if you have issues with weak glutes, and that's what causes a particular type of pain, go and do some glute exercises, then come back to the movement that you're getting the pain in and see if it makes a difference. If it does, that's a sequence that you can now use. If you get low back pain with things, and doing ab exercises fixes that low back pain, you might think, oh yeah, but it only fixes it for about an hour or so. That's okay. That's all we need. Do your ab exercises first, then try and do the exercise that you were trying to do before. If it still causes pain, then just skip the exercise that's causing you pain. But if it all of a sudden alleviates the pain, then this is now a technique that you can do to continue doing that movement. So these are some of the things that we can do if we have joint pain. And again, I just want to reiterate, we don't want to be training through pain. We don't want to be training through clicking or clunking. That's a sign that something's wrong. Especially if the pain is brought on by the exercise or made worse by the exercise. And this applies to during and immediately after, and sometimes even the next day as well. If we have joint pain the next day or non-DOMS pain the next day, then that's something to be careful of and to really have as a caution sign. What do I mean by DOMS pain? DOMS stands for delayed onset muscle soreness, and it's just the normal soreness that we get after training. It's normally not really there the day of. The next day you might feel it a little bit. The second day you feel it a lot, and then it kind of diminishes after that. But if the pain is not DOMS, if the pain is significantly worse immediately after, that's normally a sign that it's not the natural DOMS that we want, and it's actually something else that we're looking out for. So in that case, it's not the kind of pain that we want to train through or push through. We want to train around pain, not through it. So that's joint pain. Hopefully that's given you some ideas there. With another example that I can give is during my powerlifting competitions when I was competing in powerlifting, there's 3 exercises that you do. There's squat, bench press, and deadlift. So the squat is you basically have 3 attempts at each at your absolute strongest weights. So you might say, okay, I'm going to go 100 kilos on squat, then for my second attempt, 110, then for my third attempt, 120. And the biggest lift that you get from each of them is added up so that you get a number for your squat, a number for your bench, a number for your deadlift, and those 3 add up to your total. So the person with the biggest total wins. For me, I had been doing years and years of squatting. I've been training since I was about 13. So I had the movement pattern relatively down pat, but what I was struggling with was sacroiliac joint pain that was preventing me from being able to squat consistently at all. If I did squats consistently, it just set me off. And again, coming back to all the stuff we've talked about, in an ideal world, I just would have changed to a different squatting pattern or changed to a different leg exercise. But in powerlifting, it's the specific technique that you need to use. And I couldn't veer so far away from that. So what I did was I used deadlifts and lower body exercises to build up my muscle mass, because we know that muscle mass has a direct correlation to strength. The cross-sectional area of a muscle has a pretty linear relationship with how strong that muscle is. So rather than just focusing on maximum strength, I focused on build muscle. So I've got more potential for strength. And then I did, coming into my competitions, just a couple of practice squats at heavy weights. I could do some singles or some doubles, so 1 or 2 reps without my hips getting set off. It was more when I did, 4 or 5 sets of 4 or 5 reps that it started to really get set off. So I could get away with just some very low volume is what we call it, or low dose squats. So high intensity, heavy weights, but not very many reps of them. I could do that just for the few weeks coming into my competitions. So I built muscle and then I honed in the skill coming into it. And again, I had been squatting for a lot of years at this point. So I had that movement pattern down pat, but that's just another example of how I had to work around my joint pain and a practical example of how that actually looked for me coming into competition. Another example that I was thinking about today actually is my bench press. So powerlifters, the way that they bench press, they usually use this arch, which is actually, a lot of people think it's really bad for you. It's not. And if anything, for the shoulders, it makes the movement a lot safer and a lot more secure, because getting that arch allows us to get the really nice retracted and depressed shoulder blade position that feels a lot nicer on the shoulders when you're lifting absolute max weights. And my best bench press back in the day was 115 kilos. So I was lifting some pretty decent weights through these hypermobile shoulders. And the more I arched, the better my shoulders felt. But the more I arched, the more it sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes set off my sacroiliac joint and my low back issues. And again, it's not that arching is bad for your back. If you've got underlying back issues that are made worse by arching, then it's going to be bad for your back. And that's one of my big issues, is my low back problems are quite extension intolerant. So extension intolerant means when I arch my back, that's normally what triggers the pain. For a lot of people, they're fine with extension and they're flexion intolerant. So when they round forwards as if they're doing a sit-up, that's actually what causes the pain. But unfortunately, I'm one of the few who have an extension intolerant back. So for me, arching my back in the bench press sometimes caused pain. So what did I do? Well, very similar to what I did with the squats. I basically adapted the exercise so that I could still practice it in some kind of way without the trigger. So with the squats, I had to just completely overhaul and say, okay, I'm going to do leg press and deadlift and things like that to build the muscles up. With bench press, I just did like a feet up bench press. So I used that to build my upper body strength. And obviously I was lifting a lot less there because the leg drive and the arch in your back help you actually achieve that extra strength. But I would do less weight, but I was still building my upper body muscle mass. So that's what I really focused on, was building that muscle mass and then doing a low volume approach to the competition specific technique coming into competitions. That's just another example of how I did that. Now, hopefully that explains everything for joint pain. Let's move on to the next common issue that people with Ehlers-Danlos have, which is craniocervical instability. And craniocervical instability is this idea that we have. It's quite complex, and it's something that I'm doing a bit of a deep dive on at the moment, getting a little bit more of an understanding about it. But basically, it's this instability in our neck. So we feel kind of like a bobblehead, which I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. It can also be linked to really tight muscles around the neck. You might find every time you do a sit-up, your neck muscles just get jacked up and go kind of crazy. Or you might find that when you're kneeling on all fours, it sets off your neck. You might find that you used to be able to move your neck quite freely, but now you're so concerned about it. Like for me, whenever I watch boxing matches, it just makes me cringe because the thought of getting punched in the head, I'm like, I think my head would fall off. Like I don't think there's anything there to keep it there. So craniocervical instability, it is an issue that is very common with Ehlers-Danlos. And what a lot of people say is that they have something that sets it off, maybe a fall, and they hurt a muscle in their neck. And then from then on, it's just never been the same. And this is very position, like it dependent. Position dependent is the word. I was struggling to find the word there, but position dependent is what I was thinking. So what we can do to work around craniocervical instability, this is not to treat craniocervical instability, just to be clear. This may help it inadvertently, but this is not me saying this is your physiotherapy recommendation for how to treat this thing. You need to work with a specialist who really knows the head and the neck and hypermobility if that's something you want to, that's a path you want to go down. But as a strength coach, what I'm going to recommend is that we, again, don't train through it, train around it. So two of the best things that we can do for craniocervical instability is either doing things with your head supported or doing things where your head is what we call stacked over the rest of the joints. So your head and your neck are vertically above each other, because what we know is as soon as we lean forwards, this is then, if you understand physics and biomechanics, basically what it's doing is it's increasing the lever arm that the muscles have to work through. So it's kind of like if I was to give you a 5 kilogram weight and I said to you, you have to hold it overhead, the easiest way to do it is to lock your elbow, lock your wrist, have your shoulder stacked underneath your elbow, stacked underneath your wrist, and just sort of, it's not quite hanging because it's the opposite of hanging, but it's almost like a hanging on the joints. Just let the weight rest through the joints. The moment that we start bringing that arm down, so that's like 12 o'clock, right? Our arm's up at 12 o'clock. The moment that we start bringing our arm down to say 1 o'clock, this is now making our muscles in our shoulder work a little bit harder. The hardest position is going to be 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on which arm you're using. That is now the hardest position because this is now basically the longest lever arm for this particular muscle. So with our head and our neck, the more we lean forwards or the more we lean back, and different people will have different things that trigger them more, the more that's going to set off those muscles. So doing exercises, finding a way to do them with your head and your neck stacked above each other, and again, this is not to treat the condition, this is just so that we can continue training around it, that can be a really nice technique to use. So an example of this is if you are doing a lat pull down. Usually with the lat pull down, we have to lean back slightly and then pull the weight down to roughly our collarbone. Sometimes that is enough to set off the muscles of the neck. So what we can do instead is do it seated on the ground with a cable machine, and we just are reaching out to the side and pulling it in just single arm at a time. So we're not having to lean back at all. There's no bar because we have to lean back so that the bar can clear our face. So in this instance, we don't actually have to lean back at all, and we can get that muscle working that we're trying to target, which is our lat muscle, without setting off our head and neck. That's just one example. Now, what I also mentioned is we can stack the head and the neck above each other, but also another option is to do something with our head and neck supported. So if you've got really bad issues with the neck, what we can do is variations of like ab exercises or something like that, lying down with our head supported on the ground. We can do things if doing a rowing exercise sets you off, you can set it off so that you're lying flat on your back and attach a band or something up high and then pull directly downwards. And that is still a rowing exercise, but your head and your neck are completely supported. We can do like a chest supported dumbbell row in an incline bench where your forehead is completely supported by the bench. So these are some examples. Depending on how bad yours is, you may have to, some of them may not even work for you, but making those adjustments can be really nice. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is intracranial hypertension. And this is something that people don't really talk about too much with Ehlers-Danlos, but it's something that we do a lot of the time experience. Not everyone, some of us get it. Probably quite a few of you people listening to this get it without realizing as well. Intracranial hypertension, what is it? So hypertension is like high pressure. Intracranial it's high pressure. Instead of being high blood pressure, it's high pressure of our cerebrospinal fluid, which surrounds our brain and our spinal cord and is in the the compartments of our brain, and it's around our eyes and things like that. So for whatever reason, people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility are more likely to have issues with this of having raised intracranial pressure. What does this feel like? Well, if you've had an intracranial hypertension headache, you will know, because it just feels like death. It feels like, I don't know, you've been hit over the head with a shovel or something like that. It is just the worst. Lying down makes it worse. I've had issues with this before. So my bed is kind of permanently on an incline. So my head is up high and my feet dangle down low. At first, it did feel like I was falling out of the bed, and my dog did fall out of the bed a few times. But once you get used to it, it's okay. But I've had issues with intracranial hypertension. It's hard to get diagnosed. I do need to get it diagnosed. I just haven't been to see a doctor for it. Where I live, there's not really, as far as I know, there's not doctors who can help me with it. So anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But when it comes to strength training, what are we going to do? Because what intracranial hypertension is going to show up as in the strength training context is when you lie down, it makes the pressure worse. So exercises lying down do not feel good. When you do the classic powerlifter or strength athlete kind of take a big breath and pressurize, which we do to help brace and protect our backs, that is going to make the pressure worse. Doing a chest supported row lying down, so you're pressurizing, you're lying down, and you'll also have this pad against your torso. All three of those things are going to increase your intracranial hypertension if that's something that you struggle with. So what can we do? Firstly, we're going to have to adjust things so that we're not lying down. We're going to have to find versions of things where we're seated, standing, or if we're lying down, only doing a very small amount of it and standing up between sets. So if you're doing a lying hamstring curl, again, this is going to depend on how tolerant you are to it. Sometimes when I have issues with this, I just avoid anything lying down at all. Sometimes I'm like, it actually feels okay if I'm doing a lying hamstring curl, but only 5 reps. Lightweight so that I'm not having to pressurize at all, and I stand up between each set. Or I could just go and do a seated hamstring curl. or a kneeling hamstring curl or a standing version. So knowing a little bit of anatomy, this kind of comes back with the POTS, with the joint pain, with all of these factors. Knowing a bit of anatomy so that we can adjust the exercises is super, super helpful. And coming back to what we're talking about here, intracranial hypertension. So avoiding lying down exercises, probably a lot of the time it's going to be involving reducing the weight a little bit so that we don't have to rely on bracing. Because here's the conundrum. Bracing is one of the best things that we can do to protect our spine, our torso, to make it rigid, to allow for what we call efficient force transfer. So efficient force transfer means that the work that we're doing, whether it's in our upper body or our lower body, it's actually effectively moving the weight that we're trying to move. So if you imagine a crane, the beam that comes out from the crane, and then the rope, or I don't know what it is, but something dangles down from it. Imagine that beam is made out of something kind of floppy. You can do all the work that you like in the motor to lift something up off the ground. If the beam is floppy, it's not going anywhere. So having that stiff midsection through bracing is super important with strength training. And if someone's got low back issues, bracing is like one of the first things that we teach them. But with intracranial hypertension, bracing can increase that pressure and make things feel a lot worse. So when you're having this particular type of flare-up, I would recommend reducing the weight back down, doing weights that you can breathe through. So normally with strength training, we want to breath hold, but with these, I would recommend someone to breathe through the movement. So still keeping everything as rigid as you can here, and not letting your abs and torso and your core muscles just kind of flop around. But what we want to do is we don't want to do the breath hold Valsalva maneuver style brace. Now, what I would do in this instance is find a way that you can work your core muscles that you normally rely on with bracing. So in particular, the ab muscles, find a way to get them a little bit activated before you do the whatever exercise we're going to do next. What this will do is it will mean that you get that little bit of muscle activity in those muscles without having to really focus on locking down and bracing as hard. If you can't brace as hard, that would be the technique that I would use. So do a little bit of ab activation so that you've got those muscles there a little bit active. Then we want to avoid doing the really intense bracing, which means that we have to only be doing exercises and loads that are safe for us to do with that reduced bracing. So on days where I've got issues with my intracranial hypertension, I'm not going to be doing barbell squats or deadlifts or anything that requires me to brace to safely do that movement. I'm going to be doing lower loads on things so that I can breathe through them and really just focusing on trying to get that muscle to feel the movement rather than doing it as a whole body bracing, all systems go kind of thing. So with intracranial hypertension, we want to avoid lying down. We want to avoid pressurizing. Maybe doing fewer reps might be a good option as well, because the longer the set goes on, the more we're going to need to brace and pressurize, but just doing a smaller exposure to that slight increase in pressure and getting up and walking around and breathing through it can be a great option. And if you're struggling with it, doing something like adjusting your bed so that it's on an incline, that can also help. Again, that's not treating the cause. It's not treating the cause of the intracranial hypertension, but it's just managing it and allowing us to continue training. Because like I said at the start, consistency actually is important, but in order to be consistent, we're going to need to make these adjustments as we go. And again, this is one where you do need to work with a doctor. You do need to work with a neck specialist. I'm not telling you this so that you can say, oh, la, 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 I don't have any issues. I'm going to just continue training around it. No, this is advice on how to continue training under a doctor's guidance, under a rehab specialist's guidance. But these are some adjustments that working with them, you can make to your training. Sometimes, for example, doctors, I've heard people say that their doctor gave them some POTS-friendly exercises, but they then hurt their joints. So this is where a strength coach comes into it and says, okay, POTS means this, but now we also need to adjust it for your joints, which means this, so we can integrate these different approaches in. So again, this is not medical advice. This is me giving you strength training advice on how to work around these things so that you can continue exercising. Because the other thing with Ehlers-Danlos is sometimes if we take too much time off training, our joints start hurting. So if we take all this time off every time something flares up, it makes it really difficult to maintain our reduction in pain, to maintain our momentum with our training that we rely on so much. And This is also not me saying go out and do a powerlifting competition when you've got intracranial hypertension. That is not what I'm advising at all. A lot of the time, this will mean reducing the loads right back, reducing the intensity right back, but still just maintaining some form of momentum with your training during this time. All right, next we've got fatigue, and fatigue is a really challenging one. I am okay with it at the moment, but it is something that I have really struggled with in the past. There's a few different ways that Ehlers-Danlos can contribute to fatigue. For example, we can have specific not muscle imbalances, specific nutritional deficiencies that can cause it. For me, my iron gets so low sometimes. Actually, mine got down to 12. I've got some friends with Ehlers-Danlos, or 20 or something. It's supposed to be over 50 or over 100. I don't know. I've got friends with Ehlers-Danlos who get down to single digits. And I'm like, I don't even know how you're functioning. I was at the doctor crying when they said, I think I got my B12 checked because it had been low, and then I got a shot and I felt amazing. And then I felt tired again a couple of months later. So I went back and I said, is it my B12? And they said, no. And I just started crying. I was like, I can't function. I'm only doing 1 or 2 hours of work a day, and that's it for me. I have to go sleep after that. So fatigue can be a huge issue. Got my iron infused, again, not nutritional supplements, infused, because the problem is that my digestion doesn't absorb the iron properly. So taking it as a supplement wouldn't have done me much good. Infused, felt amazing afterwards. So that's one of the causes of fatigue, can be these nutritional deficiencies, whether it's iron, B12, vitamin C is something that we tend to have issues with as well, vitamin D, all of these things. So that's one source. Also histamine issues. I don't know the exact mechanisms of this. I do know that histamine plays a bigger role than we realize a lot of the time with Ehlers-Danlos. So that's something to think about, nutritional stuff, histamine stuff. I know, like after COVID, for example, I got extraordinary amounts of fatigue for months, and it was really debilitating. But fatigue is something that we can experience. Now, what do we do with fatigue? This is where I think it's really nice to have an idea of where you're going with your training. So what do you want to do with your training? Do you want to get to the point where you can, I don't know, walk for half an hour without being in pain? Or is your goal to have a particular physique? So I really want a big muscular lower body, or a big muscular upper body, or I want to be really strong at deadlift, or I want to be really strong at this particular exercise, or I just want to be generally pain-free. So have an idea of where you're going with your training. And this kind of works for everything, all of this, but I think fatigue is the one where it really stands out to me. So have an idea of where you're going, then break that down into its components. So let's take the big deadlift, for example. I want a really big deadlift, which is true. That is accurate. I do want my deadlift to be back to its former glory. My best deadlift, I've deadlifted over 200 kilos a few times, and I would just love to get back up there again. But let's say I'm trying to get there and fatigue's in my way. Okay, what are the different components of a big deadlift? And I think this is a really good example, because deadlift is a very fatiguing exercise, and doing heavy deadlifts, I think, would be extraordinarily hard when you're feeling very fatigued. So let's think about the components of a big deadlift. I've already mentioned muscle mass is an important one, and certain areas. So this is something that I just know because I've been training for so long. But if you've got an experienced coach, they should be able to help you with this as well. So we need torso muscle mass, we need glutes, we need quads, we need hamstrings, we even need some calves, we need some upper back muscle mass. These are some of the more important muscles with deadlift. So we've got muscle mass. Then we've got the technique. So using good technique, if you want to get strong, it's super, super important. So using good technique. Then we might find that your deadlift has a particular sticking point, which is just fancy lifting terminology for the point that you tend to fail the lift. So if you have a sticking point right off the ground, it means that you tend to not be able to get it off the ground. If your sticking point might be right at your knees, it's just where you get it up to your knees, and if the weight's too heavy, you just can't get it any further. Maybe your sticking point's at lockout. So we need to know where that sticking point is and do some particular techniques to train around it. Then we've got obviously rest and recovery. Then we've got the nutritional side of things. So you need to be eating enough in order to do that. And if you don't eat very much, then you're going to tend to lose weight, and that will come off as fat loss, but also muscle mass. If you're not eating enough, what else have we got? Let's just go with those for now. So those are the different components that we've got of getting a big deadlift. When you're fatigued, you are not, one more. The actual skill of lifting heavy weights and getting mentally into it and getting, that neural drive, let's call it. lift these big weights. Okay, there's more to it, but let's just cut it there. So that's the components of a big deadlift. Now, if you're extremely fatigued, the heavy weights are probably going to be out of the question for this point in time. But the best strength athletes in the world do this for a long time, and they have all of these other components. The best strength athletes in the world are jacked. They've got muscle mass, muscle on muscle. They've got great technique. They've got really good habits with their food. So food breaks down into not just what you're eating, but what your habits are, what you fall back on. They've got all of these things that we're talking about here. So why not, when you're fatigued, why not let's just work on a couple of them? Maybe we'll say, okay, I'm just going to go in and do some glute exercises. I don't want my glutes to atrophy. I'm going to make sure that I'm eating enough food because I don't want to lose muscle mass. I'm going to make sure that what were some of the other things that we're talking about? Muscle mass. We've got technique. Maybe I'm going to go in and do some really light technique stuff. Sticking point. Maybe I'm going to go in and do some stuff that just works my specific sticking point. So you pull back, you know the components, and then you strip back the ones that are going to be the most fatiguing. You focus on the ones that are very important, but not so fatiguing. Let's think about this from a I want to get a big lower body now. So what are some of the smaller muscles that we can work on? This is how I did with my lockdown training as well. I didn't have all of the big machines that I was used to using to, really grow my quads, really grow my glutes. So we focused on some of the little muscles that I needed to bring out anyway for my lower body. If your goal is just general health, okay, cool. What can we do during this time? Yeah, you can't train as much. Let's get you in there moving a little bit in a way that's not fatiguing. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep that momentum going through so that when the fatigue goes down, and it will go down at some point, when that fatigue goes down, you're still there, you've still got that momentum. And maybe it can be focusing on habit formation, getting better habits around food. And I'm not doing this in the way that's like the whole awful habits, high performance, hack your body, all that kind of just exhausting. I'm already fatigued thinking about that, let alone having Ehlers-Danlos fatigue. But I mean very, very small things. So on your worst days, you're slightly better than when you're on your worst days 6 months ago. So maybe it's getting for me, I've been loving collagen protein at the moment. It just feels okay on my stomach, unlike all of the other proteins. And I use the unflavored one. So my goal lately has been to make sure that I have that every day. That's it. Even if I'm not getting my full protein amount, which is not great as a strength coach for me to be saying that, I've got to admit, I haven't been as consistent lately, and that's okay because I'm going to get consistent again. I know that I will. It's just who I am. It's just it's just what I love. So I know I'm going to get consistent again. But for now, if I can build this habit, imagine how great that's going to be back when I'm feeling more motivated, when I've got more energy, when I'm more able to do things. So focusing on these little habits that we can build, having your electrolytes every day, having your getting outside and getting some sunlight, getting your feet on the earth, things like this, just forming those small habits that will later add up to you being able to do the thing that you want to do. But what we need to have is some kind of direction. This is where I want to go. Then we need to work backwards and break it down. Now, the last thing that I listed is like a general flare up. And normally, I don't know, it depends on how long your flare ups last. I have got actually a whole podcast on this. So we might have just like a couple of days of flare up. It might be a couple of weeks of flare up. Normally for me, the way I'm consistent with this is, and for me, a flare up usually means there's not much that I can do. Like my joints hurt, I'm fatigued. Maybe I've got intracranial hypertension. Maybe my neck's extra playing up. Joints hurt for no good reason. Like why do you even hurt? I haven't even done anything with you and they're just hurting. I'm learning the role that histamine plays in this. So if you're wanting to go a deep dive, that's something, mast cell activation syndrome, histamine's role in joint pain. That's something to, I guess, look into. But with the flare up, the best advice I have to stay consistent during a flare up, firstly, this is a flare up. This is not how I am forever. Ehlers-Danlos is a fluctuating condition. Understanding that the lows are lows. They're not your normal. They're your lows. So just get your head around that. This is not how it's going to be forever. This is just for a period of time. And just stripping things back to the bare bones. Maybe it's some activation exercises. Maybe it's a 15-minute walk with your dog. Maybe it's doing working a couple of your favorite muscles and just going in and doing those. a really nice word. Rather than consistency, I like the word momentum. I don't know why. It just appeals to me a lot more. Consistency kind of infers that we've got to be exactly the same and consistent and, all of this stuff. Momentum and exposure are two of my favorite words with Ehlers-Danlos training. So this is where we get, maybe during a flare-up, we're just doing the bare minimum to maintain momentum. Maintain the momentum of making the habit of going to the gym 3 times a week. Maintaining the momentum of knowing, okay, these muscles are being used. Or maybe it's, okay, I know if I stop training, my ribs are going to start subluxing again. I know if I stop training, my shoulder's going to start dislocating. What's the bare minimum that I can do to avoid those specific things happening? And that's what I'm going to do during a flare-up. And it's this balance of what can you do to help versus what's going to be too much and send you further into a flare-up. And that's what we're watching out for. So that's my advice with the flare-up training, is to have like a bare bones, bare minimum. And sometimes, and this applies to all of these things, sometimes the best thing to do is rest. This is not me saying you need to push through all the time. I hate that macho stuff. I've spent, like I said before, I have not been as consistent as I would love to be. The past couple of years, I've had just life happening, parents dying, interstate moves, things like that. I've talked about this before on my podcast. And it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes the best thing for you to do is to rest and to not let yourself mentally stress over, I should be training, I should be doing this, I should be doing this. And I think that's a big thing to take away from this episode, is don't let the mental stress of what you should be doing add on to the stress that we're already experiencing with Ehlers-Danlos. So I guess this is me giving you the permission to make these changes and to still understand that you're going to be moving forwards and you're going to be making progress. And this is actually the way to make progress. It's not that this is, I've got to take a step backwards. It's like, no, this is just a step to the side. This is just how it is with Ehlers-Danlos. Get used to dancing. Step backwards, step to the side, step forwards. That's dancing. That's what we have to do with Ehlers-Danlos. Get used to it. It's not, it kind of reminds me of when one of my friends, who's not EDS, but we were doing a bodybuilding prep together, and she got really sick, and she was just, oh my gosh, everything's going downhill. I'm sick. This is ruining everything. And I was like, babe, this happens to everyone on prep. This is part of it. This is not an exception. This is part of it. And with Ehlers-Danlos needing to make these adjustments, it's not an exception. It is part of it. It's a ride. We got to roll with the punches. So, and mentally relieving yourself of the idea that you need to be perfect all the time, that you need to be pain-free all the time, that you need to be able to train at your 100% maximum all the time. Take that pressure off you. You're already pressured enough. You're already hurting enough. You already have enough stress. Take that pressure off you. Okay, I can just adapt and move and kind of be like water and just sort of free flow and roll with it. And you never know what kind of knowledge that's going to bring and what kind of personality traits that's going to bring. It's going to bring a huge amount of mental calmness, fortitude, emotional flexibility, all of these really positive character traits. This is an opportunity for us to build those. And those, some would argue, are better than building a strong body. So again, this is not me saying that you need to exercise all the time. If you need to rest, sometimes you need to rest. But with Ehlers-Danlos, there also is this thing where if we rest for too long, sometimes this can make some of our symptoms go backwards. So from that perspective, maintaining momentum and exposure to exercise can be really important. Also, if we have this initial inflammation response that we often get from starting exercise again, or rapidly increasing our amount of exercise, or trying some new kind of exercise. So if we've already gone through that inflammation response and now we're finally into this good phase where training is not flaring us up, and then we have to stop for whatever reason and start from scratch again and redo all of that inflammation, that can be an issue as well. So that might be a reason why we choose to continue training, even though we've got some things to work around. But we always need to do it safely. And again, we need to work with really good rehab specialists, medical teams to help us do this in a good way. And good is the important thing there, to make sure that these specialists who are helping you are actually good and exercise minded. And, my background is an exercise science degree. We're taught exercise is medicine. You can use exercise as a dose and prescription to cure so many different things. So making sure that they have that understanding is really important. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I'm going to take a little bit of time now just to talk about something that I've got coming up starting this week, actually, which is the next round of my Bendy and Strong course. So if you like these topics, if you get a lot from them, you will love the Bendy and Strong course. I can guarantee that. It's a 14-week course that I've designed for people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility to learn how to strength train better for their bodies. So there's a whole range of different topics that we cover. We talk about how to warm up effectively for your body. We talk about the benefits that strength training can have and how to maximize those benefits. We talk about common fitness industry advice that just does not apply to us or is really actually counterproductive for us. We talk about lifting technique. We talk about how to make these adjustments. So for example, I gave the example of substituting in other exercises. If you've got joint pain, what are those other exercises? The whole course is POTS friendly. The whole course is CCI friendly. At every point, we're saying these are some adjustments you can do if you've got POTS. These are some adjustments you can do if you've got CCI. These are what you can do when you're feeling really fatigued or flared up. And it's a community. So it's not just, obviously I'm giving the, let's call them lectures, but we've also got it as a community, as a group, so people can add their ideas in, add their experiences in, and support each other through it. So this course is, I actually sat down with a bunch of people with Ehlers-Danlos to design the course. I found out what they wanted to know. We go through anatomy, we go through all this stuff that they requested, and we've had awesome feedback from it so far. Someone who did the course, one of my followers on TikTok just randomly dropped in. I was doing a TikTok live the other day, and they just randomly dropped in this thing that they said they previously couldn't walk 500 meters without having to lean on a fence or something like that. And now they're walking their dog for several kilometers without pain, which is just insane. Another person said that their shoulders dislocating significantly less, that they're actually able to feel the muscles that they're supposed to be feeling when they're exercising. So this course is great for you if you're experienced at strength training, if you're new to it, if you're just working out from home. Everything is adaptable to at-home training as well. So that's starting this week in a couple of days. It's not too late to register. The cost is $25 Australian per week, but if you can't afford that, we do have some discounted spots available. I do give out some free spots at the moment. We're filled up with those, but if you really can't afford the discounted spots, so they're either $7.50 or $15 Australian per week. If you can't afford those discounted spots, you can put your name on the wait list for the free spots, and that's an option as well. Another common question I get for the course is, can you do it from anywhere in the world, or do you have to be in Australia? No, it's all online. So you can do it from anywhere in the world. The time slot for the live session is 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday. So if you're in England or America, it'll be your Wednesday night. But it's all recorded. So you can watch it either in the live session, or you can go back and watch the recording afterwards. And there's a forum for you to post questions in and get feedback as well. So if you would like to register for that, I'll put the registration link in the show notes. It's at www.bendyandstrong, BENDYANDSTRONG.com. And you can register through there. If you want a discounted spot, you'll have to get in contact with me and I can send you the discount code for those. Please, if you're getting a discounted spot, just make sure you actually, if you can afford the full price, please don't take up the discounted spot, because there are limited numbers. But if you need the discounted spot, don't think, oh no, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not needing this enough. It's there for people like you. It's there for everyone who needs it. If you're cutting into your savings or necessities in order to afford the $25 a week, then the discounted spots are literally built there for you. Anyway, that's everything from today's session. Please feel free to send me through any questions. You can find me on Instagram, Annie Short Strength. On YouTube, I think it's Annie Short Strength as well. On TikTok, it's Annie.short, or the Hypermobile Strength Coach. So please feel free to send through any questions there. Until then, hope you're having a great week. Hope your Ehlers-Danlos isn't too bad. Oh, actually, one more thing that I forgot is for the course, if you're a clinician, it's also open to clinicians. So if you don't have Ehlers-Danlos, but you want to learn more about it, or you're a family member, it's also open to you. But anyway, back to my little outro. Have a great week. Enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you're feeling okay. Hope your Ehlers-Danlos is okay. Hope you're able to get in and do all the training that you want. I do have some guests lined up for some future episodes. So yeah, apologies for the delay. I've been focusing so much on this course. It's been a little bit of time between podcasts, but we're back now. So look forward to the next episode. And until then, happy training.